In the frigid winter of 1916, the forests of northeastern France stood silent, cloaked under a veil of frost and fog. Yet beneath the soil of Verdun, centuries of conflict had already been buried, waiting to erupt once more. For the French people, Verdun wasn't merely a dot on the map, it was a heartbeat of their military heritage, anchored by ancient forts built in the 19th century after the Franco-Prussian War. Following the humiliating loss of Alsace-Lorraine in 1871, national pride became inseparably tied to the land around Verdun. So when the German High Command, led by Erich von Falkenhayn, proposed an offensive here, it was no accident. His strategy wasn't to take territory, but to drain the French army of life to bleed it dry. Falkenhayn believed that if he attacked a point so emotionally sacred to the French, their command would be compelled to defend it at all costs, even to the brink of annihilation. He assumed French stubbornness would do the rest. And so, without much resistance from his colleagues, Operation Erich, translated as Judgment, was drafted and launched, with German artillery positioned across the Meuse River ready to thunder into action. The initial barrage began on February 21, 1916, with over 1,200 German guns releasing hell upon the French lines. The sky turned black as millions of shells screamed down on trenches, villages, and forests, turning living spaces into a pulverized nightmare. Entire regiments vanished into smoke and shrapnel. The deafening roar continued for 10 hours straight, shaking the earth and deafening men. Then, through the ruined woods, German stormtroopers advanced. Verdun's outer defenses crumbled. Fort Douaumont, a massive stronghold considered nearly impregnable, fell within days, captured not in a grand assault, but by a handful of German soldiers who found it largely unguarded. The psychological blow to the French was enormous. But even as the early weeks favored the German momentum, the French response was ferocious. Enter General Philippe Pétain, a methodical and calm leader, not known for flair, but for his deep concern for the common soldier. Pétain understood that if Verdun fell, it would shatter morale across France. His first act was to secure the Voie Sacrée, or Sacred Way, a narrow road linking Verdun to supply bases in Bar-le-Duc. Along this thread of survival, 6,000 trucks moved day and night, delivering men, ammunition, and food in an uninterrupted stream. As long as that lifeline held, Verdun would not fall. Pétain revolutionized the defense by rotating troops regularly, a concept unheard of at that scale. Instead of keeping units at the front until they were spent, soldiers were cycled through every few weeks. This prevented collapse from exhaustion and spread the psychological burden across the army. Soon, every second French soldier would fight at Verdun at some point in 1916. The rotation was nicknamed the Noria, after the rotating water wheels used in irrigation. French artillery, though initially overwhelmed, gradually found its rhythm, pushing back German gains with deadly barrages. The French soldiers nicknamed the battlefield the mincing machine and hell on earth. They clawed through mud and blood to retake craters and ridges, sometimes gaining just meters at the cost of thousands. Trench warfare was no longer just positional, it had become psychological. Both sides faced horrors that defied comprehension. Men drowned in shell holes filled with rainwater and blood, while corpses piled up unburied, attracting swarms of rats. The smell of decay and cordite hung in the air like a shroud. Yet Verdun was no longer just a location. It had become a symbol of France's very soul. And that soul was not ready to die. As the battle wore on into spring, the land itself turned against its inhabitants. The once forested terrain had become a charred wasteland of cratered moonscapes. Trees were stripped of bark, snapped like matchsticks, their splintered trunks jutting from mud like broken ribs. Nothing green survived. Shells fell with such consistency that estimates suggest more than 60 million artillery rounds were fired over the course of the battle, an average of 6 per square meter. The line between life and death was razor thin, decided not by bravery, but by luck. A man could be obliterated while tying his bootlace, or spared amid 1,000 deaths by a chance misfire. The scale of destruction bewildered even those who'd witnessed the Somme and Ypres. Verdun was not about winning ground, it was about enduring horror. The French held, bled, and bit back. German commanders, surprised at the resistance and haunted by their own mounting losses, began shifting tactics. They captured hilltops, then lost them. They overran villages like Fleury, Louvemont, and Thiamont, only to find the French returning, wave after wave, to reclaim what had been rendered unrecognizable. Meanwhile, General Pétain's concern for morale led him to issue circulars of encouragement and honor acts of bravery. He built a cult of resilience, where defending Verdun became a badge of honor and sacrifice. Still, the psychological toll was enormous. Soldiers wrote letters soaked in tears, hallucinated voices from shattered bunkers, and lost friends within inches of them. Trenches collapsed from rain and shellfire. Flamethrowers introduced a new horror to close-quarters combat, as waves of burning fuel turned underground shelters into crematoriums. The Germans, now under Crown Prince Wilhelm's nominal command, became trapped in a cycle of futile advances. Though Falkenhayn had hoped for a bloodletting, he underestimated French tenacity and overestimated his army's capacity to endure endless offensives. By summer, German morale began to crack. Pétain, soon replaced by the more aggressive General Robert Nivelle, had done enough to stabilize the front, though his departure saddened troops who had come to see him as a guardian angel in the inferno. The tide slowly began to turn. French artillery, reinforced by longer-range guns and better targeting, began hitting German supply lines and artillery positions. German advances stalled, especially around Fort Vaux and Mortem, Dead Man's Hill, where defenders fought in pitch-black tunnels and suffocating gas clouds. Stories of individual heroism became legend. Major Sylvain Raynal, the commander of Fort Vaux, held out for days without water, ultimately surrendering only after every man had exhausted his strength and ammunition. The Germans respected the defenders so deeply they allowed Raynal to keep his sword. The French began pushing back inch by inch, crater by crater. But the cost was horrific. By September, Verdun was a nightmare of steel, fire, and memories that would scar a generation. Letters home spoke of comrades exploding into red mist, of hands clutching photographs before vanishing, of prayers whispered amid machine gun chatter. Clergy were brought in not just for last rites, but for mass burials. Every inch of gain was paved with the screams of the dying. The dead were uncountable, often unidentifiable. Verdun had become a graveyard without tombstones. Still, orders came. Hold the line, retake the ridge, reinforce the flank. And so they did. From February to December, the battle raged, engulfing 300,000 lives and wounding nearly 1 million more. Some units were entirely erased from existence, their names remembered only on memorials carved in stone. Families across France and Germany waited for letters that never came. Mothers wept over telegrams. Cities organized silent vigils. Meanwhile, back on the battlefield, a strange sense of unity formed among survivors, an understanding that they had witnessed something far beyond the comprehension of civilians or politicians. They had stared into the abyss and crawled back out bloodied, broken, but unbowed. Even enemy soldiers came to respect one another, recognizing that survival in Verdun was a kind of grim brotherhood. The physical wounds could heal, perhaps, but the psychological ones would not. Men flinched at thunder, wept at fireworks, and relived the screams of dying comrades in their sleep. Verdun had claimed more than lives, it had shattered innocence. By the end of 1916, the German offensive at Verdun had fizzled into futility. The French, under General Nivelle, had counterattacked with renewed vigor, retaking both Fort Douaumont and Fort Vaux by December. What began as a plan to force France into submission had instead turned into a symbol of French endurance. Falkenhayn's gamble had failed spectacularly. The bleeding strategy had backfired, costing Germany hundreds of thousands of irreplaceable troops and achieving no decisive breakthrough. The battlefield remained roughly where it had started, but the psychological terrain had shifted forever. France emerged with a sense of moral triumph. Verdun became a national shrine, a place where the Republic had proven its will could not be broken. Yet the cost was unimaginable. Villages ceased to exist. Forests vanished. Rivers were poisoned by decay and cordite. And the people of France, though proud, were deeply scarred. Across the front, both French and German commanders took lessons from Verdun, though not always the right ones. For some, it proved the utility of grinding attritional warfare. For others, it revealed its madness. The Somme, Passchendaele, and later Chemin des Dames would all echo Verdun's terrible rhythm. In Germany, Falkenhayn was replaced, and Crown Prince Wilhelm's reputation suffered. In France, Pétain's name grew into legend, eventually earning him command of the entire French army. Yet even he would later reflect on Verdun with horror rather than pride. The cost in human souls was far too great for any laurels. Poets, novelists, and artists struggled to capture the enormity of Verdun's suffering. Painters sketched fields where no color existed, only gray mud and red blood. Writers like Maurice Genevoix and Henri Barbusse chronicled the horror with brutal honesty, describing not just combat, but the annihilation of dignity. The land around Verdun was so damaged that even a century later, parts remain uninhabitable. Dubbed the Zone Rouge, it contains unexploded shells, human remains, and poisoned soil. Pilgrims and tourists walk among the trenches and ossuaries, particularly the Douaumont ossuary, which contains the bones of 130,000 unidentified soldiers, French and German alike. There, in silence, visitors confront the scale of human folly. The battle left behind not only graves, but ghosts of men who fought because they were told to, who died believing their sacrifice meant something eternal. It inspired both pacifist movements and nationalist fervor. Verdun was invoked again during World War II by Charles de Gaulle and others, who saw in it the indomitable French spirit. But for many veterans, Verdun was a wound that never healed. It haunted them in waking hours and dreams, in the silence between meals, and in the gaze of empty chairs. More than a century later, Verdun remains a paradox. It was both a senseless slaughter and a moment of national unity, both a symbol of courage and a monument to the failure of diplomacy. It stands today as a reminder that war, even when fought with honor, extracts a price far beyond comprehension. Beneath the soil lie men who died for a few meters of land, for pride, for orders written by generals miles away. Yet they did not die in vain. Their legacy is etched into the memory of France, into every flame that flickers beneath the arch of triumph, into every quiet ceremony held at sunrise. Verdun taught the world that in modern war, victory can look identical to loss. But it also taught us that the human spirit, bloodied, battered, and almost broken, can still endure the fire. And in that endurance lies the only kind of glory worth remembering.